Hello, welcome to my little trip down road testing memory lane. Another Q&A for you today. Now, thanks very much for sending in all your questions, comments and observations. I read them all. I even put the little hearty thing next to the comment just to show that I've seen it. So please just keep sending them in, even if they don't seem to appear on these videos. They will one day, but I get hundreds a week now, which is really, really good. We're building up a nice little community. Last week, we talked about, the first question was about mileage and what do we consider high mileage on a motorcycle? And there's been so many comments and responses that I think it would be a little bit remiss not to dive back in and just kind of get a gauge on what everybody thinks. So the question I asked last week was kind of off the back of what makes this bike great video when I tested the KTM 990 SMT. That particular bike had 30,000 miles on the clock, and my kind of knee-jerk reaction to that was I thought that was quite high mileage. Obviously, I'm aware that motorcycles can do massive miles. You know, we've ridden very high mileage bikes on MCN. We featured a lot of high mileage bikes and ran stories of people, you know, doing the equivalent of going around the world a few times on bikes. So that wasn't really the issue. It was more, what do normal riders like me and you consider a high mileage for a bike? So that was kind of the first question. And the second question was, if you're buying second hand, at what point does high mileage start to make you a little bit wary? So yeah, loads of really interesting comments there. It's worth having a look back at that video just to sort of dive into the comments. It might take you a while, there's quite a few. But I thought I would pick a few just to sort of give you a little bit of a feel for what everyone's saying. It's really, really interesting. Quite a few surprises in there, quite a bit of an education for me as well. So let's talk about the people that have commented who've actually done a lot of miles on their bikes, and there are loads of them, and these are literally the tip of the iceberg. So let's have a little look-see. Oh, right, this is from Daryl Raspberry. I have a 2019 DRZ 400 Supermoto with 40,000 miles on it. Bought it new. I rip it every single day on my commute to work. It's never failed to start or let me down. Take care of your machines and they'll take care of you. Then we've got RH771 Fish. I picked up a 2001 Ducati 748 with 41,000 miles on the clock last year. Knowing these bikes have had issues when new with electronics, flaking rockers, etc., I thought to myself this would be one worth taking a gamble on, as there's no way it would make it to this mileage without ample amounts of servicing and love. When I got it, I serviced it with new fluids, cam belts and fresh set of tyres. After a few hundred miles, it's been tight as a drum and an absolute joy to live with. Very happy with it. Then we've got Robert Nesbitt, N90, owner Suzuki GSX-8R 1000 K6. It's just a notch up of 38,000 miles. The service history shows regular servicing, valve checks, replacement parts, etc. My point is that high mileage bikes should not be ignored, as my bike doesn't use a drop of oil and runs very quiet and smoothly. It's bedded in so well now that I'm convinced the power has not dropped off at all, and it is as it should be. It still pulls extremely strong. Engines like to be used and not sat around. So in summary, buy on condition and service maintenance. It's a stigma that needs to be addressed, that not all high mileage bikes should be tagged. Then we've got Arjun Bootsma 6881. Bought my 2015 Kawasaki Versys 1000 new in 2016, and it's got over 90,000 miles, 144,000 kilometers. It rides as smoothly and powerful as ever. My 2020 MT-09 now has over 40,000 miles, 64k. Same story, runs beautifully. Both bikes have always been professionally maintained at a good shop, and I've no intention of getting rid of either. Benny Osterby. I've 171,000 kilometers on my BMW R1200 RS from 2017. I maintain it according to the regulations and it runs like it was new. I expect it to run for at least 230,000 kilometers more without needing an engine rebuild. Craig 380. Clocked up 70,000 miles on my 2017 SV650 today. All but the first 1500 were done by me. I've never done anything other than routine servicing and it's never let me down. The only thing that's ever broken or failed is the dip beam in the headlight bulb. Look after a bike and it will look after you. Rider ramblings. My Honda Deauville had 124,000 miles when I sold her. She was my daily commute for about 14 years and Honda dealer serviced at the service intervals for all but 3 of the services. In general, she was fine. The engine was as sweet as a nut. Wheel and steering bearings a good nick. Front fork services every 20,000 miles. As parts wore out, they were replaced. Clutch, water pump, etc. But the rear suspension was on its way out and she needed a new battery. As I was commuting in a major city, I would replace the tyres every 12,000 to 16,000 miles. That's good mileage. And the brake pads every 8,000. So it all depends on how the vehicle is looked after. Full dealer service history and I would buy a high mileage bike. Nick Clark UK. I'm up to 62,000 miles on my Honda CB500F so far and it gets ridden hard as a commuter all year. I'm sure it'll hit 100,000 miles without issue. Standard servicing, a new radiator, swing arm bearing and fork seals, rides great. It's from CJEF1RP. High mileage is only relative to how the bike has been maintained. I own an 87 K75S with 230,000 miles and it still runs like a top. Good maintenance, proper street riding and sensible care make it a peach. I also have an 09 K1300S with 70,000 miles and chase my sons on their S1000R through the twisties all day long. I challenge you to find a better cared for K bike that is in perfect running condition. Alex Jackson, 9875, 15 to 20,000 miles. My ZX9 was fine at 40,000 miles. My ZZR 1400 was just running at 80,000 and my last ZS 1000 was still running, although on its last legs, at 170,000 miles. Wow. There's one in the US that did 400,000 miles. It's corrosion and cycle parts that wear out, not so much the engines. But cycle parts are easy to replace. I think we said that in the previous video. As plenty of people have said in the comments, it's condition and servicing that counts when buying a bike. Martin Wright, 3168. I have a 98 Fireblade with 30,000 on the clock and it rides like new. Keep on top of normal maintenance and servicing. Modern oils are great at looking after your pride and joy. The best favour you can do for your bike is ride it. It's not a bloody ornament. R. Jansen 3810, 93 YZF from new, sold in 98 with 96,000 kilometres, 12 months use in Vancouver, serviced fairly well but the shock died at 40,000 miles or Ks. Both wheel bearings fell apart around 60k, but the biggest thing was it drank fuel and later kept fouling plugs, traced to warm valve guides. Everything else was 100%. However, a mate later commented that since it was basically a race engine, everything that failed was normal wear and not excessive at all. I now agree and can't believe how incredibly well it was built. Robert W413. I did have a 200,000k on my 06 R6. Wow, that's a lot of revs. Before changing the engine over, I'm now at 320,000 with the new engine. Wow. On the old engine I had full compression on all cylinders. I just ran out a shim adjustment on the valves. Serviced myself the whole way. Oh, that's some commuter. David Filson, 2850. High mileage bikes are a non-issue for myself. My TDM 850 was sold with 25k and was perfect, and I don't even consider that high mileage. My current Africa Twin 1000 has over 34,000 miles. Just had its second valve check, no adjustments at 18k. 2 exhaust valves needed, the smallest of tweaks at 34,000k, and it runs perfectly and still returns great MPG. I don't consider my bike at 34,000 miles terribly high, and in fact there's a German chap that has a 2016 DCT Africa Twin with over 350,000 miles on the original engine, and hasn't had any major problems bar consumables. Adrian Doggett, my old GSX-8R 1100L, wow, remember those, did 89,000 miles, never missed a beat and didn't burn a drop of oil, and it was thrashed regularly. Those old Gixxers really are bulletproof, they are. Colin Liders, I bought a 2015 Street Triple RX with over 50,000 K on it, and I wasn't concerned at all. In the 18 months or so I owned it, the only work I had to do was replace the chain and sprockets, a new timing chain tensioner, common issue with these engines, and regular servicing. As long as the bike hasn't been constantly thrashed and has been regularly serviced and properly maintained, high mileage shouldn't be an issue. Yes, things wear out over time, but regular checks and maintenance should catch those things. The Spaniard. I have 77,000 miles on my 14 FZ09. The bike is still very tight, and people are shocked when I tell them how many miles are on the bike. It almost looks like new. I'm meticulous with maintenance and upkeep. That said, I think how the miles are put on a bike makes a huge difference. Most of the miles on this bike are on long weekend rides between 300 and 400 miles at a time. So the cold start to miles ratio is very low. The bike gets up to temperature and stays there for 6 to 10 hours at a time. That's a lot less wear than a daily commuter where a bike is being put through cold starts multiple times a day, every day, and sees all types of weather. Thurston Howley, 9501, 1999 BMW R1100 RT with 140,000 miles. Original clutch. I do all my own servicing and use quality motor, gearbox and final drive oils. Valves checked and adjusted at 6,000 miles, as well as throttle body sync. Should be good for 250,000 miles. RXL Soul. Easy. The question about mileage on a bike. I bought my K6, GSX-8R I assume, May 22, and since then I've gone from 34,000 to 73,000 miles as of yesterday. Well maintained, still runs like a dream. Wow. So I've had a lot of people comment with bikes with big miles, and it's astonishing, isn't it? I mean, it's no surprise. We hear about bikes with big miles all the time, but it's nice to see that people are out there actually doing it. Welcome back. So the yin to the high mileage yang. Got a couple of low mileage comments. Not many, as you can appreciate. They probably get lynched. But there's a couple here. There are a few more. Marquee 7025. I'd normally aim for around 8 to 11 or 12,000 miles when I'm buying a used bike, and think that it's around average mileage. Ricardo 6861, 30,000 miles is fairly high in my opinion. So then the other thing that's kind of connected to high mileage, and that kind of thought that you shouldn't put too many miles on a bike, even though we know bikes are capable of it, is what it does to the value of your bike. So if you pile a load of miles on, then obviously it's not going to be worth as much. Some dealers aren't going to be as likely to take it as part exchange. You know, there's the whole PCP thing where you're restricted on mileage. So I've had a couple of comments about that. So the first one is from Mark Taylor. My BMW 1250 GS has just tipped 18,000 miles. I bought it new 3 years ago. It's been out in all weathers, but very well cared for, very clean and serviced by BMW. But because now it's at 18k, I think its trade-in value is massively short of going for a new 1300. So I'll be keeping it long term for touring and spend the balance of a 1300 upgrade on a Honda 1000 Hornet SP for fun. Good idea. Love the series, by the way, thanks. Brilliant. CCitis says, it's funny, I can't even get a bite on selling bikes with 30 to 35,000 miles. Even the old Japanese bikes are fine. People are afraid. Oh well, I guess I will keep them. So yeah, so there is that kind of issue with high mileage bikes when it comes to trade-ins or sales. So I've also got a handful of kind of general comments about, you know, the state of the nation when it comes to high mileage bikes. So the first one is from Silver Fox Racing 1124. For me, mileage is irrelevant, condition is king. I've seen 10k bikes absolutely shagged and 60k bikes like new. I tend to go for presentation. If it looks good and there's a stack of paperwork, I tend to lean towards it as it's likely to have been looked after. Paul Mullaney, 7147. Cheers for the video. Some bikes I've been confident judging on service record and general condition, but not the mileage. All bikes past a certain age will need suspension, bearing overhaul, but that's just maintenance. I ran a few bikes up to 50,000 miles commuting year round. All worked fine throughout, but definitely needed the above doing on top of normal servicing towards the end. The engine and brakes still felt great. My current wee bike has just gone over 17,000 miles, a 390 KTM Adventure, and it still feels and looks fresh. I reckon your T-Max would handle big miles. Have a good one. I reckon so too. Mark Jackson, 7350. What constitute high mileage definitely depends on the bike. For instance, I wouldn't touch a sports bike that has over 15,000 miles on it. Sure, the engine will probably be alright, but sports bikes tend to be ridden hard, and components like suspension linkages, wheel bearings, headstock bearings, etc. all take a pounding, and the majority of people won't give them a second thought until they fail. However, a big adventure bike or sports tourer, I'd maybe consider up to 30,000 miles. Even then I'd be reluctant, especially on some of the newer stuff with so much electronic gadgetry that can very quickly turn into huge repair bills and massive headaches if fails. John Harvey, 5338. I'd rather buy a one owner bike with high mileage than a low mileage bike with lots of owners, as you never know if they've looked after it and spent the money. Most people who keep them and put miles on them look after and keep them reliable. Kyle OV70 HO. For me personally, I stay away from high mileage bikes due to not knowing whether they've been looked after properly and had correct maintenance. Every time I'm looking at a used bike, there's no record of maintenance. You don't know whether the oil was changed at 500 or 5,000k or 25,000k. If I had a detailed copy of their maintenance schedule, I'd be much happier purchasing a high mileage bike. British Gecko 8502. I think this one kind of sums the whole thing up for me, really. Completely agree with you on bike mileage. As a bike tech at a main dealer, I will see the same bike at 0 miles and 30,000 miles. There's a different feel to them once the mileage gets up there. It all still works as it should, but they don't feel as tight, for lack of a better word. A big thing that puts me off high mileage bikes is not knowing the history of the bike. A well looked after bike with frequent oil changes can last a lifetime, but when it's already up there in the mileage, the damage may already be done to the engine and it's just a ticking time bomb. That being said, my Phaser 600 has 45,000 miles on it now. I gambled on buying it at 32,000 miles and it was pretty clean, and knowing that if it did need work, I can do it all myself. It's had a fair bit of work done in my ownership, bearings, clutch, cables, charging system, but the engine still runs sweet. Clearly a well looked after bike. Personally, I'm very picky over buying any second-hand bike, no matter the mileage. 5,000 miles is too many miles if the oil is black, chain loose, under the seat dirty and wear in places I do not deem appropriate for its intended use. If it's sitting at 30,000 miles, but obviously clean, well serviced, I'd buy it over the low mileage bike that looks unmaintained. Replacing wheel bearings, steering head bearings, cables, clutch plates, etc. is significantly cheaper and easier than rebuilding an engine. Paul Hope, 3401. I'd obviously prefer a low mileage bike, but if a 30k bike had full service history that showed it was fastidiously maintained regardless of cost, I would defo consider it. However, it would have to be at a very competitive price that would make me consider one over a fresher, lower mileage example. Michael Weedle, K9R. I wouldn't touch a bike with more than 10,000 miles, but wouldn't worry about my bike with 50,000. I'd worry more about the previous owners than the actual bike. Alan Blackburn 990. I think 20,000 miles is a good benchmark because many consumables get used or worn up by that time. I personally bought bikes with 50,000 miles, but then I'm selective on how well it's serviced and the price reflects mileage. I'm happy to fully service and get the bike in good running condition myself. I think the price point logically moves, but an older bike can still give years of good service. Many owners are rubbish at looking after their bike though. Roy Godixon, for me I'd say 75 to 100,000 K, 45 to 60,000 miles, are at the point where I'd start to think about maybe a bike is beginning to creep towards high mileage. Doesn't matter if it's 5,000 miles or 50, if the bike is more than 10 years old, it's probably going to start falling apart a bit by bit anyway. But a 2-year-old bike with full service history that's done 75,000 miles, I'd have no issue with. The rubber hoses are likely still soft, the cables are still whole, and the probability of major malfunction is very low, unless it's a school bike, which gets torn to shreds in every way. But imagine a 13-year-old bike that has done 6,000 miles. How often did the owner change hoses, cables, grease the wires and bearings, etc.? Probably never, as they used it 8 times a year for the last 13. For me, the longer an old bike has been travelled, the more I trust it to a degree. Nothing kills machinery like remaining unused for ages. Steve Muir, since I've got 134,000 miles on my VFR, I think to myself when window shopping on Facebook Marketplace that a replacement VFR or VTR with only 70 to 80,000 K would be an upgrade. And finally, Chuz7777, basically after 15 to 20,000 miles, a bike will start to need more maintenance. If that's done, it'll be absolutely fine. 100,000 miles isn't high mileage for a car anymore, and 30 isn't high for a bike anymore. All really interesting comments. I suppose you could split them into 2 categories really. So number one, yeah, bikes can do really huge miles if they're looked after and all the worn out components in the engine and chassis are replaced. So yeah, a bike is just a collection of parts, isn't it? And if every part is replaced by a new one, then you've still kind of got a new bike really. But what is interesting is nobody has commented about electronics or electronics failing. And that's something that comes up quite a lot when we test bikes with lots of electronics. People say, well, what's going to happen to those in 10 years time or 20 years time? But they seem to be pretty reliable, especially things like rider aids, wheelie control and traction and all that kind of stuff. So number one, we know that bikes can go on forever, more or less. But the other question about at what point do you start getting wary about buying a second-hand bike? So service history is obviously the key, or knowing how the previous owner or owners looked after their bike. Otherwise, there's a fear of the unknown, isn't it? For example, we take that figure of 30,000 miles. It's a fair old chunk of mileage. That bike would have been down the road a few times, not literally. And you don't know if that bike has been absolutely loved and cherished the whole way. So there is a little bit of a risk there, especially if there are multiple owners. So let's before we crack on with some regular Q&As, just to cleanse the palate, what I would say is keep on sending in all your comments and observations about mileage. Do you agree with a lot of the comments I've just read out? If you've got anything more to add, be really interesting, and please comment below. Welcome back. So let's have some general Q&As. So this first one is from Ripso404. Thanks very much for your question. Does anyone else think Ohlins is overrated? Everyone just assumes there'd be an upgrade, but I upgraded my Triumph to Ohlins front forks, and no matter what I did, the bike just felt worse than stock. So Ohlins isn't overrated. I mean, whenever you move from standard suspension components to aftermarket, the quality of all the components is far better. And you do notice a difference. Generally, bikes feel plusher and more controlled. They have a wider range of adjustment, and even servicing your existing suspension at places like MCT, where I had my GSX-8R 750 done, and you can see the video that I did a couple of months ago. That makes a huge difference. But the thing is, with aftermarket suspension, like anything with a motorcycle where you start to put better quality things on it, you suddenly move its working window much narrower. So standard road bike suspension is designed to work for all conditions, from smooth roads to bumpy roads, with small riders, with big riders, with heavy riders, with light riders, with aggressive riders, with soft riders, everything in between. So you've got a really big working window. And then your adjustments of the suspension aren't designed to make you go too far wrong. So, you can muck up the handling a little bit by, putting the wrong preload or the wrong damping adjusters in, but not a lot. So normal suspension is quite friendly. Then you put something like Ohlins on, and the range of adjustment there, if you haven't got it in the window, quite often is going to feel worse than standard. So if you put front forks on the bike and they've got different weight springs to standard, that's going to make the bike feel really different. If you've got different oil level in there, it's going to make the bike feel different. If your damping adjusters are all over the place the same, if your fork length or, for example, shock length is different, again, that's going to throw the bike out. So when you fit aftermarket suspension, you really need to either know what you're doing to set it up or take it to an expert. And once you do get it in that window, you'll see a massive improvement. So, just things to check. Make sure the ride heights of your suspension are exactly the same as standard. Make sure your spring rate is designed to suit you. Make sure you've got the correct amount of sag. Make sure your damping adjusters are kind of in the ballpark as well. So there's a lot of things to do to make aftermarket suspension better than standard. But if you don't do them, quite often they could be worse, which is maybe what you've experienced here. But Ohlins definitely isn't overrated. If you can afford it, it's well worth having. There's a reason they're on all the best race bikes in the world. It's not just a gimmick. It's really good stuff, as is a lot of known brand aftermarket suspension, whether it's Maxton or K-Tech or WP or whatever. Generally, it's really good stuff. But thanks very much for your question. Next, Carl Reed, 7712. How do you adjust to hanging off one cheek, etc., with correct body position on track to not hanging off on the street and just moving your upper body, etc.? Thank you for the videos. Well, thanks very much. On track, you've got to move your body around to maximize grip, to keep the bike more upright in corners, just to sort of add safety or speed or both. On the road, you don't need such a dramatic body position, but the fundamentals are still there. So for example, on a track, your mid corner body position will have your head and shoulders off to the side of the bike. It will have your inside arm bent. It will have one whole bum cheek off the seat, like you say, and it will have your knee sticking out a little bit, but not reaching for the ground. So basically what you've got to do is kind of wind that back in for the road. You're not getting those huge lean angles on the road that you do on the track, so you don't need to hang off like Marquez anymore, but you just need to still do the same thing, but very subtly. So what I would do, my mid-corner body position on the road would be my head and shoulders are slightly off to the side, my inside arm is slightly bent and I'm slightly forward, and then I'm pivoting on my bum cheek instead of hanging my bum cheek off. And I'm going on the balls of my feet on my inside peg as well. So when I go from left to right, I pivot from bum cheek to bum cheek, and I move my arm, bend my inside arm that way, my inside arm that way, lean forward a little bit to get your arm bent, because the big mistake people make on track is riding straight arms, their inside arm in the corners, which doesn't give you a lot of confidence. So bending your arm just makes you feel part of the bike a little bit more. But that's the main difference. It's exactly the same principle, but just a lot more subtle and a lot easier, because you're not absolutely climbing over the bike. You're just sort of making small adjustments as you go through the corners. Give it a go. Thanks very much. Next is from Razvan Christian Lupu. Thanks for your question. Should suspension adjustability be a factor when choosing a bike? I'm 183 centimetres and hover around 90 kilos, depending on the time of the year. Is upgrading to aftermarket weight adjusted springs enough to compensate for the lack of adjustability? Thanks for your question. Kind of follows on. I don't think that you need to really think about suspension too much when choosing a bike. Don't let that be the kind of the thing that puts you off or not. If you've got adjustable suspension on a bike, it helps. You know, you can get it there or thereabouts, and your height and weight is kind of in the ballpark of what manufacturers would expect a rider to weigh and their height. You know, you can do a lot with preload and damping, but you get to a point where you've got to start changing springs if it becomes too extreme. So yeah, you know, getting a bike with adjustable suspension is always a good idea. And then if you wanted to take it a stage further, then get the standard suspension serviced and resprung at places like MCT, like I said. And then if you want to go the whole hog, then put aftermarket suspension on. But you can even, you know, say for example an MT-07 or an early MT-09 with kind of quite, the MT-07's got quite bouncy suspension and the MT-09 has got quite unrefined front suspension. You know, you could take that somewhere, a specialist like MCT, and get that really nicely in the ballpark with springs and oil levels and re-shimming. And once you've got that setting, you don't really need to adjust it anymore, you know, unless you're going to go on track or whatever, or go two up with luggage. You know, that one setting should be there or thereabouts. You don't actually need adjustable suspension really after that. I mean, for example, the MCT settings I've got in my GSX-R 750 are perfect for the road. I wouldn't really want to change them. I'd probably go a little bit more on the track, but if I only rode that bike on the road, I could just glue up all the adjusters because I'd never need to use them again. So definitely think about suspension when you're buying a bike, but don't let it put you off, because, you know, if you buy the bike of your dreams and the suspension's not quite there, there's always ways to get it better and not that expensive either. But thanks for your question. Next is Goldfish 8196. A question for the next Q&A, if you permit. How does the new GSX-8R compare to the GSX-R 750 in terms of ergonomics? Is the GSX-R 750 comfortable as a sports bike? I'm 5'9", I have a Z900 RS, and I'm trying to decide my next bike. Thank you so much. Love from LA, California. Well, thank you for your question. Yeah, I mean, coming from a Z900 RS, you're going to find any sporty bike more uncomfortable. The Z900 RS has got a really nice flat bars, really nice comfy riding position actually, but not too much in the way of wind protection. The GSX-8R is kind of a step between, halfway between the Kawasaki and halfway between the 750. It is sporty, but the bars are raised, the riding position is quite comfy, and you've got a screen. So you've kind of got the best of all worlds, but you compromise on performance a little bit. You know, you've got a parallel twin engine instead of a 750 screaming for. You haven't got as racy a chassis, as good a brakes, as much power. So if you wanted something really sporty, the GSX-R 750 is not a bad place to be, because it's not actually that uncomfortable. As for a 6-footer like me, I'm not too cramped on it. It's got adjustable foot pegs, and I put those low and it's fine. Still a bit wristy. I wouldn't want to ride to Spain on it like I used to back in the day, but it's fine for out and about for 3 or 4 hours. But if comfort is more your concern, the GSX-8R is a very, very good bike. And I think it actually won MCN's middleweight sports bike test last year or the year before. So it is a good one, but if performance is what you want, At your height, I don't think you're going to find the 750 too uncomfortable. Thanks for your question. Right, next, two more you'll be glad to hear. From your Red Yamaha. What percentage of confidence do you have in a new bike with a factory version of the tyre, so OE tyres, as opposed to the true tyre replacement you'd buy as a replacement? Is the factory supplied tyre 90% as good as the true one? So we've spoken about this a lot. Original equipment tyres on almost every new bike aren't quite the same as the replacements that you can buy from the shop. So for example, a Bridgestone S22 on a Yamaha XSR 900 won't be the same as the S23 you buy from a shop, or 32. Always get confused with Bridgestones. But anyway, you get my point. The OE tyres are perfectly safe. So I have a 100% confidence in them. You know, they're never dangerous. They're never going to do anything you don't expect. They just don't have the ultimate performance of the replacement, both in terms of outright grip, feel, comfort, wet weather performance. Generally, they're very stable, OE tyres, because manufacturers with OE tyres, they want them to be very stable, they want them to be hard wearing, but they also want the tyre manufacturers to deliver them at a low cost. So sometimes the OE tyre might be a single compound version of the replacement's double compound. It might have different construction, different rubber, and everything in between. So I do have a lot of confidence in OE tyres, but if you then move to replacements, you're going to feel a big improvement. Thanks for your question. And finally, if you're still with us, and if you are, well done, thank you very much. This is from Rich Nada BS. Hi, if you're at Donington on a cold day, sports touring tyres, without tyre warmers, how many laps would you do to warm up? Also, what are you using to film, please? Right, Donington on a cold day is quite precarious. Everyone's heard of the Craner Club. A lot of people crash on the left side of the Craner curves because there aren't many left-handers at Donington, and Craner's a fast downhill section and loads of people lose the front there. And on a cold day, you know, the tyres just don't warm up very quickly at Donington because it's such a fast flowing track. So I would give sports touring tyres are probably the best things you can do on a cold day. You know, when we do very cold track days and you see people with racing tyres on a track day in their tyre warmers, when they leave the pits, the temperature of those tyres is going to go down. Then they queue up, waiting to go on a track. It's going to go down and down and down. They'll do some steady laps, and basically the tyres are getting ever colder. The warmest point is when they're in the pits, in their warmers. And that's why you get a lot of cold tyre crashes, especially that time of year. Sports touring tyres are designed to work from the get-go, so they're very good. And you know what you lose in maybe a few seconds a lap, you'll gain in safety and reassurance. So we use sports touring tyres at the Ron Haslam Race School when I was there instructing on Fireblades. And generally on a cold day, I would say 2 laps to warm the right side of the tyre up, and maybe another 2 laps again before you can really go for it on the left. If at all, on a cold day, I'd always be wary of the left. As the weather warms up on a warmer day, you know, again, 2 laps on the right, maybe an extra lap on the left, but I'd always be a little bit wary of the left-handers at Donington, unless it's an absolutely red hot day and you're well up to temperature, then you can start pushing on the left as well. What do I use to film? GoPros, DJI Osmo, and a little Sony digital camera, ZV-1. So just a combination of those. But that's it. Thank you very much for your question. Once again, thanks for all the mileage chat. It's absolutely fascinating. Every day's a school day as well in some respects. So if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. I've got a lot of new subscribers from the last video, so welcome along. Thanks very much for subscribing. And and we'll see you soon.